The air in the Galactic Concordium's grand hall felt oppressively stale. It always did. The chamber was vast, large enough to house an entire Terran sports stadium, yet somehow still suffocating. Dr. Elias Grayson, historian of the United Earth Academic Delegation, stood before the assembled extraterrestrial scholars. He was the only human in the room, surrounded by towering figures of different species, their bodies adorned with shimmering diplomatic regalia, their many eyes blinking with muted curiosity or, in some cases, thinly veiled boredom. The Tlees delegation, resembling 10-foot-tall mantises, clicked their mandibles in the rhythmic language of the Concordium. The translation system in Elias's ear whispered the words, "We acknowledge the presence of the human historian. Let us proceed with the presentation." Expectation, moderate interest. From the far end of the chamber, a bulbous, jelly-like Rosathi scholar undulated slightly and emitted a slow, condescending warble. The translator rendered it in a droning monotone. "Human history has proven to be unimpressive. Your species lacks true galactic significance. You have no star-spanning wars, no thousand-year dynasties ruling multiple worlds. We wish to understand why you are here." Elias exhaled through his nose, suppressing his irritation. He'd dealt with this before. Aliens who viewed humanity as insignificant, primitive. To them, Earth was a minor world, an irrelevant backwater that had only recently clawed its way onto the galactic stage. They thought human history was boring. That was about to change. He took a step forward and placed his hands on the podium. The lights dimmed slightly as the hollow display activated behind him. "I understand your skepticism," Elias began, his voice calm yet firm. "Humanity is new to the galactic community and by your standards, our history is young. But let me tell you something." His fingers danced across the controls, pulling up a series of images: rolling plains, nomadic horsemen, siege weapons poised before city walls. "You believe we have no great conquests, no legendary rulers who reshaped the world? You are mistaken." The image shifted, revealing the fierce, unrelenting eyes of a man clad in furs and iron. His face was weathered by war, his expression as ruthless as the empire he would carve from the bones of his enemies. "This," Elias said, his voice lowering, sharpening, "is Genghis Khan. And by the time I'm finished, you will understand why his name alone sent shudders through an entire world." A ripple of unease passed through the audience. The Rosathi scholar's gelatinous body pulsed as if in mild discomfort. The Tlees clicked their mandibles again, this time with curiosity rather than dismissal. Good, Elias thought. Now they were listening. The rise of a storm. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin, began with nothing, Elias continued, his voice steady but growing in intensity. A boy abandoned, left to fend for himself on the frozen steppes of Mongolia. His father was poisoned, his family left to die, his people scattered like dust in the wind. But Temujin did not die. He survived. He endured. And he forged himself into a weapon. Images of the Mongolian steppes filled the display. A vast, endless sea of grass, stretching beyond the horizon. The Mongols lived as nomads, constantly moving, constantly fighting. But Temujin? He didn't just fight, he conquered. He united the warring tribes, crushed rival clans, and built an army that moved faster than any force in history. Elias's fingers tapped the console again, bringing up a new image. A Mongol warrior, bow in hand, galloping at full speed. The Mongol horse archer. The deadliest soldier of his time. Imagine an entire army where every man could ride for days without rest, fire arrows with deadly accuracy from horseback, and strike before their enemies even knew they were coming. The Mongols didn't just defeat their foes, they annihilated them. A murmur spread through the chamber. The Tlees, who prided themselves on their own speed and agility, tilted their heads in fascination. But uniting Mongolia wasn't enough, Elias continued. Temujin had a vision, a world ruled by the Mongols. And he would stop at nothing to make it real. The wrath of the Mongols. The next image appeared, a city, its walls high and strong. The alien scholars leaned in slightly, their interest piqued. "This is Samarkand," Elias said. "A mighty city of the Khwarezmian Empire. It had stood for centuries, its walls considered unbreakable. When Genghis Khan came, its rulers believed themselves safe. They thought they could defy him. They were wrong." The image shifted to Mongol siege engines, then to a burning city, bodies strewn in the streets. When the Khwarezmians betrayed Genghis Khan's envoys, executing his diplomats and mutilating their bodies, he did not simply retaliate. He erased them. Every city that resisted was destroyed. Samarkand fell in days. Another city, Urgench, fought back, so the Mongols turned its streets into rivers of blood. The Khwarezmian Empire, once great, was left in ruins, its people scattered to the winds. Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few glanced at each other. They did not just conquer, Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They terrorized. They weaponized fear itself. Entire armies surrendered without a fight, choosing servitude over slaughter. Some rulers, when they heard the Mongols were coming, simply killed themselves to avoid what was coming. A thick silence hung over the hall. The legacy of fire and steel. Elias let the tension settle before he continued. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. No force had ever moved so fast, fought so relentlessly, or ruled with such totality. Cities that surrendered were spared and absorbed. Cities that resisted? Wiped from existence. He gestured, and the screen displayed a map of the world, slowly being consumed by Mongol expansion. You believe human history is dull? Elias asked, stepping forward. No species has ever dominated its world so completely, so swiftly. The Mongols reshaped civilizations, redrew borders, shattered empires. They were not warriors. They were storms. And their leader? The man who came from nothing. The final image was of Genghis Khan again, his cold gaze burning through the centuries. He changed history forever. The silence that followed was absolute. The Rosathi scholars' gelatinous form pulsed rapidly, a sign of agitation. The Tlees clicked their mandibles in hushed discussion. Even the normally smug Zalari delegate, a reptilian species known for their disdain of younger civilizations, leaned forward. Elias folded his arms, letting them process what they had just heard. Then, in a quiet, measured voice, he asked, "Still think human history is boring?" The murmurs grew louder, the weight of realization sinking in. And Elias knew, this was only the beginning. Silence reigned in the grand hall of the Galactic Concordium. The alien scholars sat frozen, their expressions a mix of fascination and unease. The sheer brutality of what Elias had described, of how one man had reshaped the world through fire, steel, and terror, had shattered their preconceptions about human history. The Rosathi scholar, whose gelatinous body pulsed in deep thought, finally broke the silence. "Your account contradicts our previous studies," it admitted. "We were informed that human conflicts were localized, that your wars were limited by terrain, resources, and logistics." Elias allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "You were misinformed." With a flick of his wrist, the hollow display shifted. Maps of the Mongol Empire expanded across the projection, cities falling like dominoes, entire regions consumed by an unstoppable tide. The Mongol war machine was unlike anything the world had seen before, Elias continued, his voice measured but forceful. Most armies relied on supply chains, long fragile lines of wagons carrying food, weapons, and armor. Not the Mongols. They lived off the land, hunted their own food, and drank the blood of their horses when water was scarce. A murmur rippled through the hall. The Tlees, who prided themselves on endurance warfare, clicked their mandibles rapidly. The idea of drinking one's own mount to survive was beyond brutal, it was ruthless efficiency. But their real power, Elias continued, pulling up an image of galloping horsemen, was speed. The Mongols moved faster than anyone thought possible. They could ride over 100 miles in a day. Their scouts mapped enemy terrain months in advance. And when they attacked, they did so from multiple directions at once. The map shifted again, highlighting Mongol invasions against China, Persia, and Europe, each campaign a perfect storm of deception, ambushes, and relentless force. They feigned retreats, lured armies into traps, then crushed them. Their enemies had no chance to regroup, no time to strategize. Against the Mongols there was only one choice: submit or die. The Rosathi scholar undulated. This level of strategic depth is disturbing. Your species has only one homeworld. The Mongols fought as if they were already a spacefaring empire. Elias chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Exactly. The fall of the superpowers. He turned back to the projection. The next images depicted the great civilizations of the 13th century, empires that had stood for centuries, powerful, proud, unbreakable. And yet, Elias said, voice dropping, the Mongols broke them all. The image changed to the Song dynasty of China. This was the mightiest empire of its time, wealthy, technologically advanced, and guarded by massive fortresses. The Mongols swept through them like a wildfire. They learned siege warfare from captured engineers. They built massive trebuchets capable of hurling stones the size of boulders. And when they breached the walls, A new image, bodies piled in the streets. Cities in flames. They showed no mercy. The Tlees delegation leaned in, mandibles twitching in astonishment. Their own species had waged long territorial conflicts, but the idea of learning an enemy's own technology to perfect destruction? That was something else entirely. The projection shifted again, this time displaying the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad, Elias said, pacing slowly across the stage. One of the greatest cities in the world. A center of knowledge, culture, and science. The Mongols arrived in 1258 and demanded surrender. The Caliph refused. The image that followed was pure devastation. The Mongols tore through its walls. They slaughtered the inhabitants. And in one of the greatest losses to human history, they razed the Grand Library of Baghdad. Thousands of years of knowledge, gone. Scholars were executed. Books were thrown into the Tigris River until, as legend says, the waters ran black with ink. A hush fell over the chamber. Even the more warlike species among the Concordium looked disturbed. The Zalari delegate, a reptilian scholar with glistening blue scales, hissed. This level of destruction is madness. Your ancestors destroyed their own knowledge? Elias's jaw tightened. Yes, and we still feel that loss today. Pause. Then a new image, Europe. And then they came for the West. Europe meets the Mongol tide. The aliens watched as the Mongol expansion reached the heart of Europe. Armored knights, clad in steel and wielding massive swords, faced off against the swift Mongol cavalry. European knights were among the strongest warriors of their age. Clad in thick armor, trained for brutal melee combat. They expected a fair fight. The image zoomed in on a battlefield, thousands of knights, shattered, broken, strewn across the earth. The Mongols did not fight fair. Elias pointed to the projection. At the Battle of Legnitsa, a massive European army marched against them. The Mongols feigned retreat, drawing them into a trap. Then they surrounded them, bombarded them with arrows, and unleashed biological warfare. A few aliens visibly tensed. They catapulted infected bodies over the walls of besieged cities, spreading plague among their enemies. The Zalari delegates' slit-like pupils widened. This is not mere warfare. This is extermination. Elias nodded grimly. The Mongols were not interested in conquest alone. They reshaped the world through war. They forced cultures to adapt or be erased. A final image. A vast empire stretching across Asia and Europe, the largest contiguous empire in human history. This was the world under Mongol rule. The man who defied fate. Elias turned back to the audience. But here's the thing about Genghis Khan. He paused, letting the tension build. He started as nothing. A boy abandoned on the steppe, surviving off scraps. And yet he didn't just change his own fate, he changed the fate of everyone. The projection dimmed, leaving only the piercing gaze of the Mongol leader. His bloodline continued ruling for generations. His descendants became emperors of China, Persia, India. They shaped trade, culture, and warfare itself. Even today, 1 in 200 men on Earth carry his genetic legacy. The Rosathi scholar pulsed again. 1 in 200? Across an entire species? Elias nodded. His empire may have fallen. But his influence never did. He let the weight of his words settle over the chamber. A history not so boring after all. A long silence stretched between them. Then the Tlees scholar clicked its mandibles in an almost reverent gesture. Humanity's history is more violent than we imagined. More relentless. This Khan of yours was not merely a conqueror. He was an extinction event. The Rosathi scholar undulated again. We believed humans had no legendary rulers. We were wrong. Elias simply folded his arms. I told you. Pause. The Zalari delegate leaned forward. Tell us more. Elias smirked. Subscribe and I'll take you even deeper into the chaos that followed his death, because what came next might be even wilder than his conquests. Elias leaned forward, his fingers dancing across the hollow display. The image of Genghis Khan faded, replaced by 4 figures, his sons and grandsons, each staring forward with a gaze as cold as the Mongolian steppe. You think the Mongol Empire ended with Genghis Khan? Elias asked, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. It was only the beginning. The chamber was silent, the alien delegates leaning in, their forms tense. The great Khan died in 1227, leaving an empire so vast it spanned from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. But absolute conquest is one thing, holding on to it is another. His sons and grandsons inherited the largest empire in human history, and then they tore it apart trying to keep it. The display shifted, showing a massive map divided into 4 distinct regions. The Mongols split into khanates, each ruled by a different branch of Genghis Khan's descendants. And what do you think happened when you put warlords at the head of the most ruthless military force in history? Elias smirked. They did what Mongols did best. They fought. The fractured empire, 4 wolves, 1 throne. The first segment of the hollow map glowed gold. The Yuan dynasty, Elias began. Ruled by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis. He conquered China and declared himself emperor. But there was a problem. A second segment, tinged red, pulsed. The Chagatai Khanate, deep in Central Asia. They hated Kublai's rule. To them, he had betrayed Mongol traditions by settling in China, adopting Chinese customs. A third section, a stormy blue. The Ilkhanate, Persia. They converted to Islam and began to wage wars against the Muslim Mamluks of Egypt. Finally, the last section, an ominous dark green. And then the Golden Horde. They ruled over Russia and the steppes of Eastern Europe. They saw themselves as the true Mongols, nomadic, brutal, unstoppable. Elias paused. Now, imagine all 4 of these powers, each ruled by men who believed they were the rightful heirs of Genghis Khan, staring at each other across the known world. What do you think happened next? The answer was obvious. They fought. And the world burned again. Brother against brother, the Mongol civil wars. The map exploded into chaos, borders shifting, armies clashing, cities falling. Kublai Khan had the wealth of China, Elias continued, pointing to the golden region. But to the Western Mongols he was soft. A pretender. And so they rebelled. A new projection, a vast battlefield in Central Asia. Thousands of Mongol horsemen, once united, now slaughtering each other. The Chagatai Khanate turned against Kublai. But that wasn't the only war. The Ilkhanate in Persia had converted to Islam, something the Golden Horde saw as a betrayal of Mongol tradition. So they turned against them. The Zalari delegate hissed. They waged holy war against their own kin? Elias nodded. Mongols had always been religiously tolerant. But power? Power was never shared. He tapped the display again. And the bloodiest war of all? The battle between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate. The projection shifted to depict a massive battlefield, stretching across the frozen rivers of Russia. They fought in the winter on the ice. Thousands of cavalry charging, their horses slipping, men drowning as the rivers cracked beneath them. No treaties. No mercy. The war lasted for decades. The Rosathi delegate pulsed anxiously. And yet your species still survived? Elias let out a low chuckle. Oh, humanity thrived on this chaos. Because while the Mongols were fighting each other, something new was rising in the west. The hollow display flickered, revealing the silhouette of a city crowned with spires. Europe. And they were about to strike back. The fall of the Mongol Empire, the War of 1,000 Blades. Elias paced, his voice taking on the gravity of an approaching storm. The Mongols seemed unstoppable. But even the strongest empire has limits. The moment they fractured, their enemies seized the opportunity. The first image. The Chinese revolted. Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty crumbled. The Ming dynasty was born. The second image. The Ilkhanate in Persia fell into civil war, then collapsed. The once mighty Mongols of the Middle East vanished into history. The third image. The Golden Horde? They ruled Russia for centuries, but in time, a small, unremarkable city began to push back. Elias smirked. That city's name? Moscow. The room filled with murmurs. And the final blow? Elias paused dramatically. The Black Death. Gasp. The hollow display shifted, showing a Mongol siege on a European city. Only this time the Mongols weren't just attacking. They were dying. They carried the plague with them. Their own bodies spread it as they besieged cities, weakening Europe even as they terrorized it. But Europe survived. He turned to the delegates, locking eyes with them. And that was the end of the Mongol Empire. The legacy of the Khan. The screen dimmed, leaving only the solemn image of Genghis Khan. They conquered more land in 25 years than Rome did in 500. They reshaped trade, warfare, culture. And even in their downfall, they changed the world. Elias let the silence hang. Then a final question. Tell me, he said slowly, is human history still boring? The Zalari delegate stared at the screen. No. It is terrifying. The Rosathi pulsed. And you are saying, this is only one chapter? Elias smiled. Oh, we're just getting started. Subscribe and I'll tell you about the next empire that rose from these ashes. the one that shaped the modern world in ways even the Mongols couldn't imagine. Elias let the silence hang for a moment longer. The alien delegates were no longer just curious, they were transfixed, their minds struggling to process the sheer brutality and complexity of human history. You wanted to know how the Mongols reshaped civilization? Elias said, pacing slowly. The answer is everywhere. Even today, humanity still feels the shockwaves of the Great Khan's empire. He tapped the hollow display and the room filled with new images, cities, trade routes, battle formations, even written laws. You see, the Mongols didn't just conquer. They changed the world. The Pax Mongolica, an empire that united the world. The screen shifted, displaying a vast, interconnected map with glowing trade routes stretching across Asia and Europe. After the Mongols had torn through civilization, something strange happened, Elias said. For the first time in human history, the world was connected. The Zalari delegates' tendrils twitched. Connected? But your species was at war. Yes. But under Mongol rule, trade flourished. The Mongols enforced peace, by slaughtering anyone who resisted. Elias gestured at the map. With their empire stretching from China to the Middle East, the Silk Road became safer than ever before. Goods, ideas, and diseases spread faster than at any point in history. He smiled grimly. It's ironic, isn't it? The same warriors who burned cities also built the first version of a global economy. A new image, a merchant caravan moving through the deserts of Central Asia. Spices, silk, gunpowder, and knowledge flowed from east to west. It was during this time that Europe rediscovered ancient sciences, mathematics from the Islamic world, and even Chinese innovations like paper money and the compass. Elias turned to the Rosathi delegate. You once asked how humans advanced so quickly. The Mongols played their part. They didn't invent new technology, but they spread knowledge across continents faster than ever before. Pause. But knowledge wasn't the only thing that spread. The Black Death, a plague born from empire. A new projection appeared, cities filled with corpses, mass graves, terrified people fleeing in all directions. The Mongols united the world, and in doing so, they unknowingly unleashed its deadliest killer. The delegates tensed. The Black Death, a plague that wiped out a third of Europe. The Mongols carried it in their trade routes, their armies, their sieges. Elias gave them a cold smile. They even used it as a weapon. The screen changed to depict the siege of Kaffa in 1346, Mongols hurling plague-ridden bodies over city walls. The first recorded instance of biological warfare. The infected city's survivors fled, and carried the plague to the rest of Europe. The Zalari spines rippled. You mean, they caused their own empire's destruction? Elias shrugged. Not intentionally. But yes. And Europe suffered for it. He tapped the display again, shifting to a new set of images. But suffering breeds change. And from that suffering, came something new. The rise of the gunpowder empires, a Mongol legacy of war. The screen now showed massive cannons and disciplined armies standing in formation. Europe learned from the Mongols. The lesson? Elias smirked. Power belongs to those who adapt. The next image, muskets. Cannons. Walled castles crumbling under bombardment. Gunpowder came from China. The Mongols spread it. And soon the world changed forever. The nomadic warriors who once ruled the battlefield found themselves outmatched by something new, nations with standing armies, firearms, and new strategies. Elias pointed at three rising superpowers on the display. The Ottomans, the Safavids, the Moguls. Three empires built in the wake of the Mongols, each using gunpowder to conquer their rivals. Without the Mongols, these empires wouldn't exist. A second later he brought up another map, this time of Europe. And then Europe. They had faced Mongol terror firsthand. They saw how swift armies could topple civilizations. And they learned. The map flickered, showing a new event, the age of exploration. Portugal, Spain, France, Britain. They took the Mongol model, fast expansion, military innovation, and ruthless conquest, and turned it into something else. The Rosathi's eye stalks swayed. Something else. Elias gave a knowing grin. Colonialism. The delegates were silent. The Europeans took Mongol speed and brutality, then combined it with naval power. They didn't conquer on horseback. They conquered with ships. And that's how the world you see today was shaped. The final lesson, the Mongol spirit in modern warfare. Elias took a slow breath. The final part of the story was here. You asked me how the Mongols shaped our world? He gestured toward a new image, modern tanks, aircraft, missiles. They taught us war. They taught us speed. And that lesson still echoes today. A satellite image of World War II appeared. Blitzkrieg. Lightning War. The Germans, the Soviets, the Americans, every great power studied Mongol warfare, how to strike fast, break the enemy's will, and move before they could recover. A new image, the Cold War. The Mongols spread gunpowder. The nations that learned its lessons built nuclear weapons. And now, the world balances on the edge of destruction, just as the Mongols once held the world in their grip. Elias let the gravity of his words settle in. Then he turned, locking eyes with the alien leaders. The Mongols didn't disappear. Their spirit is in every army, every war, every strategy that shapes human history. He smiled darkly. And that is why humanity is the deadliest force in the galaxy. Not because of our numbers. Not because of our technology. The screen faded to black. But because history made us this way. The aliens' verdict, a history that shook the stars. The Zalari delegate was motionless. This is not the history of a single empire. It is the history of a storm that never ends. The Rosathi trembled. Your kind learned conquest from the Mongols. You learned adaptation from their enemies. And now, you wield the knowledge of both. Elias folded his arms. That's right. And that's why underestimating humanity has never worked out for anyone. The room was utterly still. Then the Zalari delegate spoke again, voice low and wary. Perhaps it would be best, if our empires never made humanity an enemy. Elias smirked. Smart choice. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one last thing. His eyes gleamed. If you thought this was interesting, wait until I tell you about the Roman Empire. He leaned in slightly, voice dripping with intrigue. Subscribe. Because history is far from over. The end. Want to hear about the Roman Empire, the rise of modern superpowers, and why history makes humanity so dangerous? Subscribe now, you don't want to miss what happens next.